So let's talk about a phrase you're probably hearing everywhere in the news lately: industrial overcapacity. I know, it sounds super technical, right? But it's actually a huge story about this flood of Chinese goods. We're talking electric cars, solar panels, you name it, and it's completely reshaping global trade. It's even affecting how we tackle climate change. So what is really going on?
I mean, maybe you've even noticed this yourself. Suddenly, the prices for things like EVs and solar panels are dropping like a rock. And yeah, on the surface, that sounds awesome. But the reason why is this massive economic tidal wave that started in China. And believe me, its ripples are being felt on pretty much every continent.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to figure out what this whole overcapacity thing even is. Then we'll see how it's affecting the rest of the world. After that, we'll look at potential solutions, see how the West is fighting back, and finally, we'll ask the big question: what does this mean for the balance of the entire global economy?
Okay, let's dive right in. We need to start with the basics. What exactly is this economic flashpoint that has everyone talking?
In plain English, overcapacity just means a country is making way more of something than its own people can actually buy. The analogy here is perfect. Imagine a baker who makes 1,000 loaves of bread every single day, but the town they live in only eats 200. What do you do with those extra 800 loaves? That simple question is really at the heart of this entire global dilemma.
And here's the thing, this isn't your grandfather's trade dispute about steel or aluminum anymore. No, the center of this new storm is all about the technologies that are supposed to define our future. Electric cars, the batteries that power them, and the solar panels that will green our energy grid.
So how in the world did we get here? Well, it's kind of like a perfect storm, a real chain reaction. First off, demand inside China is pretty weak. Their property market is shaky, the post-pandemic recovery has been sluggish, people just aren't spending like they used to. At the exact same time, the Chinese government is pouring unbelievable amounts of money, subsidies, into these key industries. And all of that just feeds into an economic model they've had for decades, one that's always been about making stuff, not necessarily buying stuff. The end result, a massive surplus of very high-tech goods.
And this is the moment where a domestic issue inside China absolutely explodes onto the world stage. Because think about it, when you're sitting on a mountain of products you can't sell at home, where do they go? There's only one answer: everywhere else. And the result of that is just a staggering surge in exports. I mean, China's share of the global market for these critical green technologies has just skyrocketed. That overcapacity at home has become a flood of products for the rest of us, and it's dramatically increasing China's dominance in the EV, solar, and battery markets. Now, for the rest of the world, this is a real double-edged sword. On the one hand, hey, the benefits are pretty obvious. Cheaper green tech is great, it helps everyone fight climate change, and it can even help bring down inflation. But on the other hand, this flood of super cheap goods puts enormous pressure on industries in other countries, which leads to some serious trade friction. It could even end up crushing manufacturers in smaller, developing nations.
Of course, you've got to hear the other side of the argument. From Beijing's point of view, this isn't some unfair scheme. The official line is that China's companies are just better, that their export boom is the natural result of incredible technological innovation and being super competitive. They argue that by providing the world with affordable green tech, they're actually a huge part of the solution to climate change. So you've got these totally competing views and these undeniable global impacts. It brings us to the million-dollar question. How can you possibly fix an imbalance like this? Is there a way out?
Well, when you talk to economists, they generally see two main roads ahead. The first path is an internal one. It's all about major reforms inside China to get at the root of the problem. The second path is an external one, and it calls for the entire global community to get together and kind of rewrite the rules of the road for global trade.
So let's look at that first path, the internal one. The big idea here is for China to pivot its whole economy away from just building and investing, and toward getting its own people to buy more stuff. That could mean things like improving social safety nets, better healthcare, retirement, so people feel secure enough to spend their money instead of saving it. It also means dialing back those huge state subsidies and maybe even letting some less efficient companies fail instead of just propping them up forever.
Now, on the world stage, the proposed solution is all about cooperation. And, that's always easier said than done. The idea would be to reform big institutions like the World Trade Organization so they can actually deal with these kinds of state subsidies. It means creating a direct line of communication between major economies and demanding a lot more transparency from China about its industrial policies.
But look,
All of those are long-term fixes. They could take years, even decades. So what's happening in the here and now? Well, major powers like the US and the European Union are running a defensive playbook. They're not waiting around.
And what's fascinating is that we're seeing two very different strategies. The United States is going in hard with a really aggressive Made in America approach. We're talking massive tariffs, in some cases over 100% on Chinese EVs, plus huge subsidies to build up its own industries. The European Union, on the other hand, is trying to be more like a surgeon, launching very specific investigations before it acts. Their whole philosophy is what they call strategic autonomy.
And that brings us to this key phrase you hear all the time, especially out of Europe: de-risking, not decoupling. So what does that actually mean? Well, it's not about cutting off all economic ties with China. That would be decoupling. It's about making sure that Europe isn't dangerously dependent on China for critical stuff like EV batteries or rare earth minerals, while still trading with them in thousands of other areas. It's about strategic diversification, not a complete economic divorce. And you have to remember, this whole fight isn't just taking place with tariffs and trade walls. There's a whole other game being played behind the scenes, a diplomatic one. High-level officials like U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen are constantly in talks with Beijing, using diplomatic pressure to push for those exact same deep structural reforms we were just talking about. Okay, so let's zoom out one last time for the big picture. When you put all these pieces together, the cause, the global effects, the reactions, what is really truly at stake here?
When you boil it all down, this is a fundamental clash of systems. It's about China's incredibly powerful, state-driven model for economic growth colliding head-on with the market-based rules that have pretty much governed global trade for decades.
And that leaves all of us with a final and pretty crucial question. As all these tensions keep rising, are we just heading for a new era of protectionism, a world of trade walls going up everywhere? Or can the world find a new kind of balance, one that allows for fierce competition, but also for cooperation? Honestly, the answer to that is going to define the global economy for a long, long time to come.